The elevator hummed as it climbed toward the top floor, its mirrored walls reflecting a face Ryan barely recognized anymore. The polished shoes, the nervous glance at his watch, the resume folder clutched a little too tightly. All fragments of a man trying to start over. When the doors opened, a wave of cold, perfumed air swept in from the executive floor. He stepped out, straightened his tie, and froze. Behind a wall of glass, her name glimmered in gold letters. Emily Carter, Director of Marketing. His pulse faltered. The girl he once mocked for thrift store clothes and cafeteria coupons now stood at the pinnacle of everything he'd failed to become. She looked up briefly through the glass, calm, unreadable, and returned to her work. He lowered his gaze, guilt flooding through every vein. It wasn't fear of her authority that gripped him. It was the unbearable truth that life had remembered what he wanted to forget. He found his new desk tucked in the corner of the open workspace, a modest spot overlooking the city. Every keystroke, every conversation around him felt miles away. His mind kept replaying the moment their eyes almost met. Emily had changed. Her voice sharper, her movements deliberate, her confidence sculpted from years of discipline. He wondered if she remembered him or if she had erased him, like he'd erased his conscience back then. When her door opened and she stepped out to address the team, her words were crisp and commanding. "We don't chase perfection. We execute excellence," she said. The room hushed. Ryan sat motionless, pretending to jot notes, every syllable reminding him how far she'd come and how far he'd fallen. Lunch hour came like a brief escape. Ryan slipped away to the cafe downstairs, the same one employees crowded every noon. The smell of roasted coffee and rain on pavement filled the air. He stirred his cup aimlessly, staring at the swirling foam as conversations drifted around him. Every laugh reminded him of a classroom long ago, of how laughter used to come at someone else's expense. A flash of memory cut through him. Emily at 16, clutching her worn backpack, eyes fixed on the floor as he and his friends mocked her shoes. He shut his eyes, guilt searing through the years. When he opened them, Emily was standing across the cafe, speaking with a client, graceful and poised. For a moment he thought of walking over, but the past felt like a wall he couldn't cross. Back at his desk, Ryan buried himself in spreadsheets, determined to disappear into numbers. Yet every so often he'd catch Emily's voice across the room. Calm, precise, almost melodic in authority. When she finally approached his cubicle to assign a project, he felt the world narrow to the sound of her heels against the floor. "Mr. Miller," she said, her tone professional, eyes unreadable. "I expect the campaign brief by Friday." He nodded quickly, not daring to meet her gaze. "Of course," he replied, his voice thinner than he intended. As she turned away, he exhaled deeply, fingers trembling over the keyboard. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a man starting fresh. He felt like a boy again, standing in the hallway of a high school, facing the mirror of who he used to be. When the day ended, Ryan lingered by the window as dusk settled over the skyline. Employees filtered out, laughter echoing faintly through the hallways. Emily's office light still glowed behind frosted glass, her silhouette steady, absorbed in late work. He watched for a moment. The quiet curve of her focus, the grace in her solitude, and something within him shifted. The boy who once mocked her for wanting too much now saw the woman who had never stopped reaching. The city lights blinked on below, one by one, until her reflection merged with them. He turned to leave, whispering to himself words he wasn't yet ready to say to her. "I'm sorry." The week passed in fragments, the tap of keyboards, the rustle of papers, the constant murmur of ambition filling the office air. Ryan kept his head down, determined to rebuild himself in silence. But memory had its own agenda. Every time Emily's voice cut through the room, he heard the echoes of laughter that wasn't hers, laughter from a hallway years ago, where she stood cornered by mockery and pride. The past stalked him like a shadow he couldn't outpace. During a late meeting when she leaned across the table to review his proposal, their eyes met for the first time since that morning. It was only a second, but in that second he saw everything he'd broken and everything she'd become. She didn't flinch. He did. Emily dismissed the team after the meeting, leaving only Ryan and a table scattered with unfinished ideas. "You're capable," she said, her tone measured, "but you're not focused. I need results, not intentions." Her words were surgical, not cruel, but deliberate. He nodded, swallowing the ache of recognition. Once, he'd spoken to her that way, using words to wound rather than guide. Now, hers carried purpose, not spite. As she gathered her papers, her sleeve brushed against his notebook, a fleeting contact that burned like penance. He wanted to say something, anything, but all that came out was silence. Emily walked away, heels echoing like punctuation marks at the end of a sentence he wished he'd never written. That night, Emily lingered in her office long after the lights dimmed. The city glittered outside, a silent witness to her solitude. Her eyes drifted to an old photo pinned discreetly inside a drawer, a faded high school yearbook image, her younger self smiling faintly despite the shadows around her. For a moment, she let herself remember the sting of laughter in that hallway, the sound of sneakers scuffing behind her, the cruel nickname Ryan had whispered. But remembering didn't hurt the same way anymore. It felt like looking through glass, distant, unreachable. She closed the drawer, exhaled slowly, and turned off the lamp. The woman she'd become owed nothing to the boy who once made her feel small. Ryan couldn't sleep. His apartment felt smaller than ever, papers spread across the table, his thoughts louder than the rain tapping on the window. He scrolled through his phone, searching for her name online. Every article he found painted her as a visionary leader, a woman who'd built her success from nothing. From scholarship student to corporate director, one headline read. He stared at the photo. Her standing confidently on a stage, speaking to a sea of faces, and felt the weight of irony press against his chest. The boy who once defined her worth by what she lacked was now defined by her shadow. He closed the browser and sat in silence, the rain outside whispering apologies he hadn't yet earned. The next morning, Ryan arrived early, coffee in hand, rehearsing courage he didn't yet feel. Emily entered moments later, Grace following close behind with her usual wit and watchful eyes. "Good morning, Emily," Ryan managed, his voice steadier than his heart. Emily paused mid-step, turned slightly, and replied, "Morning, Mr. Miller," before walking past. Grace glanced between them, sensing an unspoken storm. "You two know each other?" she asked teasingly. Emily's lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. "We went to the same school," she said simply, before closing her office door. Ryan's pulse quickened. The truth, small as it was, had just found a voice. Deadlines thickened the air like smoke. Ryan worked late, his screen a blur of numbers and words that refused to align. Across the room, Emily's reflection glimmered in the glass, a calm rhythm amid the chaos. The silence between them had stretched for days, filled with professionalism so precise it hurt. When she finally walked over, her tone was clipped but steady. "The proposal is good," she said, "but it lacks conviction." He nodded, pen hovering uselessly above paper. "I'll fix it." Her eyes lingered on him, not with cruelty, but with something colder, disappointment. It stung more than anger ever could. As she turned away, he realized the hardest part wasn't earning her respect. It was deserving her forgiveness. The next morning, Grace approached Emily with hesitation. "He's trying, you know," she said softly. Emily didn't look up from her screen. "Trying doesn't erase what's been done." Grace sighed, setting down a cup of coffee. "Maybe not, but it's something." The exchange lingered in Emily's mind longer than she admitted. That afternoon, she watched Ryan present ideas to a junior team. Patient, guiding, humble in a way she hadn't expected. The irony wasn't lost on her. Once, he'd laughed at her stumbles. Now, he corrected others with kindness. Still, The past wasn't so easily rewritten. By midweek, pressure mounted. A client review loomed, and Ryan's project still lacked final data. He worked past midnight again, the office empty except for the low hum of machines. Emily, on her way out, noticed his light still on. For a moment, she stood at the doorway, watching him scribble notes, lips moving faintly as he rehearsed ideas. The sight disarmed her. Not pity, not nostalgia, but the strange ache of seeing someone fight their own weakness. She left without a word. But in the morning, he'd find a small, sticky note on his desk, written in her neat script. "You're improving. Keep going." The client meeting arrived like a storm. Ryan presented the pitch, voice steady though his palms trembled. Charts, slogans, timelines, all practiced to precision. When he finished, the room fell silent. Then came Emily's voice, firm but approving. "This is strong work." The words landed heavier than applause. For a second, he forgot to breathe. Afterward, as the team dispersed, Emily caught his eye and gave the smallest nod. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was faith. A fraction of it. Hard-won and fleeting. Later that evening, as the office emptied, Emily found herself by the window again. The city stretched endlessly below. Restless, alive, forgiving nothing, yet giving everything. Grace's voice broke the silence. "He's different now, isn't he?" Emily hesitated. "Maybe. Or maybe I'm the one who changed." She smiled faintly, watching Ryan pack his things across the room. He looked up briefly, their eyes met through glass and dusk. No words passed, only acknowledgement that some wounds don't heal by erasing the past, but by learning to walk beside it. The morning began quietly, the kind of silence that hides a storm beneath it. The office buzzed with restrained energy as Emily prepared for a critical client presentation. Ryan sat across from her at the long table, reviewing notes, each line blurring as the weight of memory pressed harder against his chest. He caught her gaze once. Brief, sharp, and unreadable. He wanted to speak, to confess, to close the distance that years of regret had built. But the meeting began. Her confidence filled the room like light breaking through glass. When it ended in applause, she thanked the team, her voice calm as ever. Then turning to him, she said quietly, "Ryan, stay a moment." The others left. The door closed. The air grew heavy, with unsaid. She stood by the window, arms crossed, eyes on the city below. "You've improved," she said, her tone even. "But I need to know something. Why here? Why now?" Her words sliced through the calm like glass cracking. Ryan's throat tightened. "I didn't know you worked here," he managed. "If I had, you'd have stayed away," she interrupted, turning to face him. "You think avoiding the past makes it disappear?" Her composure was unshaken, but her voice trembled slightly at the edges. He lowered his eyes. "I was a different person then." Emily's reply came soft, almost kind. "No, you were the same person. You just finally learned what it feels like to be small." Ryan's voice broke the silence. "I can't undo what I did, but I remember every word, every look. I was cruel because I thought it made me strong." Emily exhaled, a sound that carried years of buried pain. "And it worked," she said quietly. "For a while." She turned toward him fully now, her expression stripped of all pretense. "Do you know what it's like to believe you're worth less because someone else decided you were?" Her words hit like a pulse. Ryan's eyes stung, but he didn't look away. "Every day since I've tried to be someone you wouldn't hate," he said. She studied him for a long moment, then replied, "I don't hate you, Ryan, but I'll never forget who you made me become to survive." For a long time, neither spoke. The hum of the city outside filled the silence. Then Emily stepped closer, her tone softening. "You're not here to apologize for me," she said. You're here to find peace with yourself. Don't mistake my strength for forgiveness." Ryan nodded, swallowing the ache in his chest. "I understand," he whispered. "But I needed to tell you I'm sorry. Not to erase what I did, just to finally say it." Her gaze met his, steady but no longer cold. "Then you've said it," she replied. "Now, earn what comes next." When she left the room, Ryan remained still, staring at the faint reflection of his own face in the glass wall. The echoes of their conversation replayed in his mind, not as torment, but as clarity. She hadn't forgiven him. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But she'd seen him. For the first time, she'd seen him not as the boy who hurt her, but as the man trying to understand why he had. The sunlight shifted, painting his reflection gold before fading into shadow. He exhaled, slow and deep, the weight of his guilt no longer crushing but grounding. Somewhere inside him, something quiet began to heal. The next morning felt weightless, like the air after a storm. Emily sat at her desk long before the others arrived, the city just beginning to stir outside. The confrontation still echoed in her chest, not as anger, but as a strange, aching calm. She opened her journal, the one she rarely touched anymore, and wrote only one line. "Power is not revenge, it's peace." For the first time, she didn't feel defined by what had happened, but by what she had become. When the sun rose, painting her office in gold, she closed the book and smiled faint. Healing, she realized, didn't always come with forgiveness. Sometimes it came with release. Ryan arrived late, the fatigue of sleepless nights clinging to him. He passed her office door, hesitated, then kept walking. At his desk, he stared at his reflection in the computer screen. Not the tired employee, but the boy who once laughed at someone else's pain. He remembered the look on her face that day in high school, the one that had haunted him ever since. For years, he thought time had buried it. But now, time had forced him to look directly at it. The memory no longer made him defensive. It humbled him. For the first time, the guilt didn't feel like punishment. It felt like truth. That evening, Emily took a walk through the rain. The city pulsed with rhythm, umbrellas opening, lights shimmering off wet asphalt, footsteps echoing through alleys. Each drop felt like memory rinsing away the sharpness of the past. She stopped by a bookstore window and saw her reflection beside a display of leadership books, her own name printed on one of them. A soft laugh escaped her lips. She had once been the girl who couldn't afford textbooks. Now, her words were sold on glossy shelves. She thought of Ryan, of his trembling apology. And though she didn't forgive him yet, she hoped he found his own way to start again. Compassion, she decided, was not weakness. It was freedom. Ryan's apartment was quiet except for the soft hum of rain against the window. He sat on the couch, surrounded by old photo albums, ones he hadn't opened in years. There she was, Emily younger, sitting at the edge of a class photo, eyes bright but distant. He traced her image with his fingertip, wondering what she had dreamed of then, what she must have felt walking home after the laughter faded. The memory no longer burned. It simply existed. And so did his resolve. He picked up his phone and typed a short message to himself. You can't change who you were, but you can honor who she became. He saved it. No one else needed to see it. The following day, their paths crossed in the corridor. A simple moment, but one that carried the weight of years. Emily was on her way to a meeting, Ryan to the elevator. For a brief instant, their steps aligned. "Morning," he said quietly. She met his gaze, not as his superior or his past, but as another soul who had survived the same story. "Morning," she replied, her voice soft, sincere. They walked past each other, no longer bound by what had been, but connected by what they had learned. Sometimes, closure didn't need a grand ending. only the courage to keep walking. The day of the annual review arrived, gray skies pressing low over the city. Ryan sat waiting outside Emily's office, his heart pounding with the rhythm of unspoken words. Around him, the office buzzed with routine life, keyboards, laughter, footsteps, while he sat suspended in stillness. When her assistant called him in, he stood, smoothing his tie like armor. Emily greeted him politely, her tone even. "Let's talk about your progress," she began. But the file in his hands wasn't his report. It was a letter. One he had written the night before, trembling with honesty. "Before that," he said softly, "I need to give you something." Emily hesitated before taking the envelope. Her fingers brushed his, a small contact that carried the weight of years. She unfolded the letter silently, eyes scanning the words written in uneven handwriting. "I don't deserve your forgiveness. I only want you to know I see now what I was, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to be the man who could have stood beside you without hurting you." When she looked up, her eyes were unreadable, but her voice softened. "This letter isn't for me, Ryan," she said gently. "It's for you." He nodded, unable to speak. She folded the paper neatly, setting it aside as if preserving both memory and mercy. "I used to think forgiveness was something people gave to make peace," she said after a pause. "But it's not. It's something we give ourselves so the past stops owning us." Her voice carried no anger, only truth. Ryan listened, each word sinking deeper than any reprimand could. "You hurt me," she continued, her tone steady. "But you also reminded me that resilience has to be built, not borrowed. So thank you. Not for the pain, but for the strength I found because of it." Ryan lowered his head, emotion tightening his throat. "I don't deserve that kind of kindness," he whispered. "Then earn it," she replied, turning back to her desk, her eyes glinting in the morning light. When the meeting ended, Ryan lingered at the door. "Emily," he said quietly. She looked up, waiting. "Thank you for not turning away." Her reply was almost a whisper. "I did, once, but you found your way back." Their eyes met, not as victim and culprit, not even as boss and employee, but as two people finally free from the version of themselves they'd once known. She smiled faintly, just enough to reach her eyes. "Go do good work, Ryan," she said, and for the first time, he believed he could. That night, Ryan returned home and opened his laptop. The letter she had returned sat beside him, edges slightly creased. He read it once more, then placed it in a drawer, not to forget, but to remember differently. Through the window, city lights shimmered like distant promises. Somewhere downtown, he knew, Emily was probably still working. Calm, relentless, untouchable. And for the first time, that thought didn't make him feel small. It made him feel inspired. He leaned back, closed his eyes, and let the quiet hum of the city fill him with something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. Months slipped by quietly, the office rhythm softening into routine. Emily's department flourished under her leadership, campaigns succeeding, teams thriving, yet beneath the professional calm, a subtle peace had settled. Ryan worked diligently, his confidence rebuilt not from praise but from consistency. He no longer sought her approval. He simply earned it through action. One afternoon, she passed his desk and noticed his team laughing. The energy light, collaborative. She paused, unseen, and realized the boy who once tore others down had learned how to lift people up. For the first time, her memory of him didn't sting. It simply was. Emily sat by the window of her office, gazing at the skyline that had become her constant companion. The city never really slept. It just breathed slower at certain hours. Grace entered quietly, setting down a folder. "You've been smiling more," she said teasingly. Emily looked up, amused. "Maybe I'm learning to let the past be the past." Grace grinned. "That's dangerous talk for a perfectionist." Emily laughed softly, the kind that came from release rather than humor. "Perfection's overrated," she replied. Peace is better. Peace is better. That weekend, Ryan volunteered at a youth mentorship program downtown. The laughter of teenagers filled the room. Unfiltered, genuine, familiar. He spoke to them about ambition, kindness, and accountability. When one boy asked why he cared so much, Ryan smiled gently. Because someone once taught me what it feels like to be on the wrong side of kindness, he said. Later, as he watched them leave, he felt something lift. A quiet acceptance that redemption wasn't a moment. It was a practice. Weeks later, Emily crossed paths with Ryan in the lobby as the company prepared for a corporate event. Both dressed formally, their movements poised yet relaxed. "You were leading a new campaign, right?" she asked, tone light. "Yes," he replied, smiling faintly. "Trying not to ruin your reputation." She laughed, genuine and guarded. "You'll do fine," she said, eyes meeting his without hesitation. It wasn't forgiveness spoken aloud, but it didn't need to be. Between them, silence carried what words never could. Later that night, long after the event had ended, Emily stood alone on the building's rooftop terrace. The city stretched endlessly beneath her, alive, luminous, infinite. She breathed in the cool night air and closed her eyes. Somewhere below, Ryan walked home through the same streets, unaware she was looking out over the same skyline. They were separate now, but connected, not by history, but by what they'd learned from it. The world moved on, as it always does, carrying them forward. And for the first time in a long time, both found peace not in forgetting, but in remembering differently.